Hello.
Hi, I'm Barry's wife.
Hi. Good
How are
morning.
you tonight?
Fine, thank you. Doing well. You're joining.
Anyways, here he is.
Okay.
There you are.
Yeah, yes, thank you for the invitation. My name is Barry Gordachuk. I'm with Barbara Bell Petroleum, and
Okay.
I'm an associate of Anil Hyman.
Okay. Nice. Thanks for joining.
It's a pleasure.
Is
And
my
where are you?
I'm based in Mumbai, India.
Okay.
And is my audio clear to you?
Perfect.
Okay.
But I see my vision is, I'm in a tall chair. Your audio is perfect. And I'm sorry, your name again, please?
My name is Mahesh Khatri.
Mahesh.
Yes. I'll not it now. I won't it now.
Yeah.
Hi. Yasin, can you hear me?
I can hear you very well, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know Mr. Anil Haimet, formerly from Singapore, but now has returned to Australia, to Melbourne.
Yes. Actually, Anil and me are school batchmates. So
Okay.
we go almost 36 years back. And we have Yasin who's showing up as Vakil over here. Yasin is joining us from Dubai, and he's also a batchmate. Yasin is also a batchmate.
Hi.
Wow. Well,
Hi, Pradeep.
the old gang is all getting together there, but that's.
Yeah, actually, we actually
Yes.
have a very few people from our batch joining. So.
Right. I reside in Kelowna, British Columbia, Canada, 300 kilometers east of Vancouver.
Okay.
Yes.
Yasin is also based in Vancouver, but he's currently in Dubai. So.
Okay.
Hi.
Good morning, good day, everybody.
Good day, good morning.
Yes.
My name is Pradeep, Captain Pradeep Hogan, and
Okay.
I'm a friend of Captain Anil Himmat, and he invited me over here.
Yeah, thanks for joining. And,
My pleasure.
Yeah. You know, the timing is quite topical because, as you would all be aware, oil prices yesterday, I believe they rose by 4% again.
Yes.
And in India, we really have a huge problem in terms of both the current difficult economic situation, and what has happened in India is that the government for the last 18 to 24 months has taken advantage of the international drop, and they have not reduced the prices for the consumers.
Yes.
The urban consumers like us are essentially financing the deficit, which that money is being spent smartly by the government in infrastructure projects. And I believe had COVID not happened, or I think there is still a gap. People have estimated that government still has some leeway in using the savings they had in the in the money they saved during the last 7 to 8 months to spend more on infrastructure. Let's see how it goes.
Very well.
So Anil has been kind enough to share his knowledge and expertise with us in the oil domain. And we had a session, in our school group on the 7th of May, where he spoke briefly about it. And then we had somebody requesting in the last session that can we have a session on oil dynamics. So I just added the geopolitics part of it. And
Anil, it's very nice to meet all your schoolmates here.
Hey, good day, Barry. How you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Must be pretty late over there.
Well, no, it's only 8 p.m.
Ah, okay.
8 p.m.
Okay. Mahesh, that's Barry Gordichuk.
Yes, yes, we
He's a
introduced
close
ourselves.
associate of mine. Yeah, okay.
Okay,
All right, good.
good. We just
Sorry, my computer is
Yeah,
giving
Anil,
some
how are you?
problems. Who's
Very
that?
nice to make your acquaintance, all of you gentlemen.
Yeah, Yasin with you.
Hi, Yasin. How are you?
Fine, fine. Thank you, Anil. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too.
How is Australia doing?
Australia is doing very good if you're talking about COVID. Yes.
Yeah, we don't talk about anything else now.
Yeah, there are almost 0 cases now in Australia. So
Great.
if it continues like this, it'll be
Great.
good. Yeah.
Yeah, they managed it very well. Good.
Yeah, they did, but they've screwed up the economy, unfortunately. But
Yeah.
yeah, it'll take a long time to
Yeah,
recover, now.
that is the side effect of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
It's a catch-22 situation anyway. Either you have COVID cases or you screw up the economy. You can't do much on that.
Yeah. That's true. That's very true.
Yeah.
That's very true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mahesh, kaise
How
ho,
many of
Mahesh?
us are there?
all well, Anil. Sorry, Anil, you were saying something?
So how many of us are online now? We're waiting for some more, no? Just
Yeah, we'll wait
about...
for about 5 minutes. So we are 11 of us already, but we will wait for 5 minutes and then we'll start.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
all well,
Yeah,
Yasin.
Mahesh,
Yeah.
everything okay with you?
Yes,
Family
yes,
okay?
God's grace, God's grace.
Very good. Very good.
I
very
just,
good.
I
very
just wanted to add something. Anil requested me to speak a bit on AI for the oil
good.
predictions.
Great.
So I
Great,
found some time last night. Literally, I started my presentation at around 8 p.m. and so I have just put a
Okay.
slide deck together, which hopefully is not very technical. So I'll run that through also after Anil finishes, and then we can have a discussion. And
Yeah, good.
How much
good.
time do we have, Mahesh?
no, we have whatever. See, I usually estimate it for an hour, but there is, I mean, on the Zoom side there is no time limit, so we can continue the discussions if people are around. And for me, it's a Saturday, so I have organized my work. I usually have a very light workload on Saturdays
Oh, good.
because my wife
We'll try
also
and-
finishes. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
No. My wife also finishes around afternoon time, so usually I also don't work in the afternoons, but because this is filing season, we have to do all our filings, income tax filings and company filings,
Yeah.
so may take up some time later on.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
Anil, I thought you said there's no income tax in India. Were you fooling us?
Well,
Yeah,
they brought
that's
it
true in
down.
Dubai.
Yeah. Yasin's from Dubai, actually. He's online too. He's
Yeah.
one of my batchmates.
Yeah, that is actually true from Dubai that there is no income tax. Tax is an illegal word here.
Yasin's got 1 foot in Vancouver, 1 foot in Dubai. So he's got home in 2 places. And Barry, by the way, is in the same longitude as you are. You would be in Vancouver. He's just north of Vancouver.
Yes.
No, I'm 300,
Okay.
350 kilometers east.
East.
But
Okay.
please
good,
give the
Barry.
gentleman my address, Anil, and I'd love to meet with him one day.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Good
next
stuff.
I will be in Vancouver sometimes in March, and it would be nice to meet you also, Barry. There.
Thank you, sir. I look forward to that.
Welcome. Same here, Barry. Same here. We'll keep in touch.
Yes.
Anil, just wanted to check, do you have a slide deck to share, or you would just be talking without a deck?
I'll be talking. Then what I'll do is after I've finished, I'll put the points down and I'll
Okay.
send it off to you. Then if you want, you can circulate it.
Yeah, no problem. I'll do that, no problem.
Yeah,
So-
I'm not as tech savvy as you are. Yeah.
No. It's just that I usually find I usually find a structured document easier for me to work with. So
Yeah.
That's the reason I take that.
No, you're right. Actually, it is. I've just got some couple of pages written down in point form.
Sure,
So
sure, no
we'll go
problem.
through it. So
Yeah.
what we'll do is, I don't know how many are online or what, but I won't start now, but I'll just give you.
We'll start because we've said 9:30, so we'll start with whoever is online. So I will admit people as they come in.
Okay. All right. So the audience that we have, I'm not sure what's their detailed knowledge base of the oil industry in general. So what I've done is I've taken the liberty of giving some very basics first, that may be kid stuff for some of them. But then as we progress and we go forward, I'll get into the nitty gritty of the oil dynamics in its true sense. Right, then we'll keep it interactive. If anybody wants to jump in or ask a question, please feel to do so. I'll sort of have a pause in between. We leave it open because I like that interaction, so that as we go along, I don't prefer to have the Q&A at the end. Some people lose track of what has been said, and some things are fresh in their mind, so we talk. Okay, so we'll start off with a little bit of history about oil in general. And we're talking oil. When I'm saying oil at this stage, I mean crude oil. So we won't talk about the products that come out of the crude oil. We'll talk about crude oil. Now, where did the whole requirement for oil come about? This is the first oil that was required in the world was heating oil to burn lamps even before we had electricity. So that was the first requirement of oil this world had, going back to the 19th century, right? This is when it all started. The first people who actually found how to use or get this oil were people in the US. And you'll see me talking a lot about US because that has got significance to it as we go along. In today's oil market also, how US plays such a large role in this whole thing. So there's a little bit of history to it. Standard Oil Company was a company that was formed by the Rockefeller family. I think it was John and William, two brothers of Rockefeller, along with the two other people who formed this company called Standard Oil Company. And you can Google this, it's all over the internet. You can read more about it on Wikipedia and things like that. So this was formed in 1870. This company's job was primarily there was a lot of crude oil that they found right on the surface in certain states in the US. And they had devised a method of using this crude oil to get kerosene, basically. So that was the first time we used a refining process only to get kerosene. So Standard Oil Company had a monopoly in America. Over the years, this company progressed and grew, and eventually in the 1920s, the antitrust movement, which was launched by the US authorities, found that Standard Oil Company has now got a monopoly in America for what is going to be a very big industry. So they passed a law that you cannot have one company running all this. So Standard Oil Company then was broken up, and these companies are now called Esso, Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, Texaco, so on and so forth. All these companies were actually Standard Oil Company. So you can see how these giants have emerged in America over the years. Just to put it in perspective, America today has 135 refineries in total. Globally, there are 700 refineries. So you can see what a large part of the refining process happens in America. So this is America. We won't get into the details of all this because it lays the foundation of oil companies in America now. Somewhere along in the Middle East, between 1300 and 1900, the Ottoman Empire expanded. Ottoman Empire, you must have read about it. There's some movies also on Netflix. They are a Turkish empire that moved in and swept and took over the full of Middle East. till 1900. Over there, the revolution started with the Saudis effectively. And over a period of time, by 1930, the Saud family threw out the Ottomans and they formed the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. After that, a New Zealander actually came to America or came to the Middle East and found that there was oil again on the surface, like similarly what they found in the US. So they obviously realized there is a lot of oil on Saudi soil. So this person then went back to America because exploration had happened in America and brought the Americans to Saudi. And in 1938 is when they first found oil on Saudi soil and Bahrainian soil, right? This is Middle East now. I won't go into the history of Africa because that's another basin where a lot of oil is being found, but not as much as these two locations. Now, when we talk of America, we are going to be engulfing the full of US Gulf Coast. So this extends from the US Gulf Coast, Mexico, all the way down to Venezuela, right? So even Canada has got a lot of oil, but in large terms, is the American and the US Gulf Coast, Middle East, and West Africa, where large amounts of oil was discovered way in the 1930s and 1940s. So when all this oil was found and they realized that the Middle East has got so much of oil, the Middle Eastern companies or countries then formed something what we call OPEC today. OPEC is the other word for Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. This consisted of 13 countries in total, right? And I'll just name them quickly so you'll get a good idea about it. It's Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, Canada, Iran, Iraq, Russia. No, sorry, this is not the one. Sorry, my apologies. It's Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, Iraq, Iran, Libya, Nigeria, Venezuela, Angola, Algeria, Congo, Gabon, and Equatorial Guinea. So these are 13 countries presently in this OPEC. So these were predominantly the countries at that time who had the oil to export. So their consumption wasn't very high, but they were large exporting countries. Somewhere in, so the history of all this was when they saw so much of oil, America did not have so much of crude oil that they could produce, but they had a lot many refineries. So they needed oil and they depended on Saudi Arabia to supply them this oil. Somewhere in the mid 1960s, 66, 67, Saudi Arabia decided to twist America's arm and they stopped sending out crude oil to them, by which you may have remembered or not, there used to be a big shortage of gasoline and there were long queues, the price of oil went up, and so on and so forth. So in the 70s, America decided that we're not going to let our arm be twisted by the Saudis. So they struck a deal with the Saudis, effectively OPEC, that Saudi will continue to supply them with crude oil at all times. And in return, America will give them arms and ammunition, as well as westernize their country, which was predominantly just desert, nothing else. So, and the other thing they put in place was that every drop of oil that goes out from OPEC at that time is going to be traded in US dollars. So that is said to be the deal of the century, where everything changed in America after this deal was made. There are reasons why I'm putting all this forward, and this will come again in the end when we discuss why the oil pricings are moving and how it moves and how it affects us. So this is how, at that time, America was producing only about 5 million barrels per day and importing bulk of their crude oil from Saudi Arabia. So after OPEC, jump forward in 2016, when they realized that many other countries are now producing crude oil other than the OPEC countries, they formed another thing called OPEC Plus, which consisted of some of the other countries who were willing to be part of the subsidiary of OPEC. And they were Russia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Bahrain, Oman, Sudan, South Sudan, Mexico, Brunei, and Malaysia. So this is now the formation of some organizations around the world that are going to control the supply and demand, and to some extent dictate the price of oil globally. Right. So this basically lays the foundation of where the oils were, who are the organizations. Now, some of you may know all this, but I'll just put it in perspective. So 44% of the global oil production comes from OPEC countries, not OPEC plus, OPEC countries. But the amount of reserves, 80% comes from the OPEC countries, global oil reserves. So a far chunk of it sits in the reserves by these OPEC countries. It puts in perspective as how much power OPEC has, and for the longevity of oil coming out in the world is dictated by these countries in the OPEC. Let's put some numbers in place now, and I'll distribute this so you don't have to write it down. The top 15 countries with oil reserves, I'll just name a few of them because these are all numbers that I've written. Venezuela, surprisingly, has the highest oil reserves today in the world, and it has approximately 300 billion barrels of crude as of now, which they know they have. Not that has not been discovered. Saudi comes in close behind at 266. And then there is Canada, which is 168 billion. Then you have Iran, Iraq, and some of these others go down to 100, 130, and 120, and so on and so forth. And the countries that today are producing crude oil, so this was with the highest amount of reserves. As of 2018-19, USA today is the largest producer of crude oil in the world, which changed pretty much after DT came into power. So he permitted fracking, and we'll talk about fracking a bit later, but just to give you. So US today produces close to 20 million barrels per day. Their consumption, on the other hand, is also around 20 to 21 million barrels per day. However, they still need to import some crude because all the crude that they produce cannot be used by the refineries effectively. So they do need to import, but they import about 4 million barrels. Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, produces about 12 million barrels, but exports 10 million barrels because they don't need as much of refined product as America needs, because America being such a vast consuming country. So, and then there is Russia, and then there's Canada. In terms of production, Russia produces 11 million, Canada produces about 5.5. China produces crude oil, surprisingly, but they cannot export because they consume a lot more than what they produce. China produces about 4.95 million barrels also. So then you have the other countries which I will circulate, you'll see them. In terms of consumption, the biggest consumer today of crude oil is America. So America is the highest producer. America is the highest consumer in the world. They consume approximately 20 to 21 million barrels per day. China, on the other hand, a close second, is 13 million barrels per day. You can see, even though China has got a larger population than the US, they consume a lot less than what US consumes. This is all putting in perspective how strong and how powerful US is in today's times when it comes to oil and oil pricing and supply and demand. So if anyone has any questions at this stage, please feel free to ask. If I can answer them, I'll surely do so.
Yes, Anil, I have one question. You referenced the volume, the reserve in Venezuela, but what quality, approximately what type of quality is that oil? Is it similar to Saudi Arabia or Selco or Repco, or just generally?
Okay, there is no such thing as good quality and bad quality crude. Some
Okay.
crudes are
I
very good
retract that.
for
Excuse me.
certain products. So the light crudes that come out of America in some qualities that come out of Saudi are very light. They can be used for producing lighter distillates more than the heavy ends. But Venezuelan crude produces more of things like fuel oil, bitumen, heavy things that are used for lubricating oil, for wax, paraffins. These are equally important and a very large industry. So a lot of people get very sweet crude because presently it's in abundance in certain part of the world in America, but they blend it with these heavier ends to get a bit of a balance between in the crude, you know. So otherwise you're only producing distillates. Whilst it is the highest consuming also, you do not want one refinery to produce only one end of the spectrum. So in my eyes, there's no such thing as good quality and bad quality. Crude is crude. Yes, some attract a higher price than the others. It depends on what the refinery wants to use it for. Anybody else has anything to discuss or talk about?
No, I think,
Yeah.
sorry,
Sorry.
somebody.
Go. Yeah, I was speaking. Maybe Mr. Mahesh, you can go on. I'll carry
No,
on.
no. Sapan, please ask your question. Sapan, please ask.
Yeah. So while you were telling the history, Mr. Anil, I just wanted to check how did the shale production affect that? I mean, there was a period wherein, you know, shale was in abundance and that had created a kind of impact on the whole industry. So if you can just share some pointers on that. Particularly
Okay, I was going to come to that later, but I'll go through it now.
Sure, as per your convenience.
Yeah, no problem. I'll address it. Okay, now shale. Do we know exactly what shale is and what it means in terms of exploring this cargo? Let me just address that. Sorry, I'm on my phone because my computer couldn't log on, so I'll just go and sit next to the charging line. Otherwise, this consumes a lot of power. Sorry about this. Okay, shale. Shale is a kind of crude. It's not a kind of crude exactly. What it is that it tells you where this cargo is going to be being explored from. It identifies itself as a US crude. All right. Now, how did they go about the shale gas and shale crude? There's a process called fracking. What exactly is fracking? Fracking is a process by which, through normal drilling, you cannot reach that crude because it's locked under some rocks and shells and things like that. So they use very high powered jet of oil, water, sediments, and chemicals that penetrates that rock to take out that crude oil. Now, when you do that, you are now disturbing the environment. What this will lead to in time to come, and God forbid it doesn't lead to a calamity, but when you disturb the rock formation deep down, you are breaking up the shell plating down under. And this is a recipe for having earthquakes. It is not something that is only written on paper. It has happened. Wherever fracking has happened, earthquakes have happened in the last 2 to 3 years itself. Fortunately, the magnitude of that as of now has been very small. So it has not affected anything in terms of damage to life or property. But if we continue with fracking, and if we are not careful and monitor this, it is going to affect, definitely going to have some earthquakes in that region. Now, what happened? There are certain countries in Europe that have banned fracking. So fracking is not something that can happen only in America. It can happen anywhere in the world. Anyone can do it. But certain countries have banned it because they feel that this is destroying the environment. The Greens are very big on this. So, and how has it affected the oil price? We'll talk about this a bit later. Let me go through that process. We'll come to the oil pricing and all a bit later. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. What we'll do now is we'll come to give an idea about the refining process. We'll slowly ease into that now. We've got the exploration out of the way. Now we'll come to the refining process, and that will lead to supply and demand, because crude oil consumed is actually what is being consumed in the refining oil. Out of the 700 refineries globally, like I said, USA has about 135. China has 128. India has about, China has 28. India has 23. And Russia has about 32. So this accounts for about 210 refineries out of the 700. The other 500 refineries are all over the world. Virtually every country has got one or more than one refinery. There would be very few small countries that does not have a refinery. Now, what exactly is a refinery? We all have done chemistry in school. And if you remember, we had something that we used to do, distillation. Does anyone remember what distillation is?
No.
Yeah. So, hey, Mahesh, you are a topper. You can't say that.
You know the process roughly. I mean, it's a chemical process, but at the end of the day, you know, what exactly happens?
It's a heat process. Excuse me.
Okay.
No,
so
you basically pick up the vapors and you condense them again, so
Absolutely.
that they get into,
Yeah. So you capture the liquid after it's condensed and you capture it down, right? Refining is distillation personified. So what they do is they take crude oil, which has a mixture of all kinds of substances in it, oil-based substances, including gas. So when they heat it slightly, the lightest of light elements of that crude oil is evaporated, goes up, condenses, and gets collected in a separate. I'm putting it in very layman's terms, okay, easy to understand. Obviously, it's a lot more complex than that. So the lightest of light gases, your propanes and your butanes, get captured first. Then you go on to the other light elements, which could be jet fuel, kerosene. Then you come down to gasoline, then diesel oil, fuel oil, and so on and so forth. So the heavier the material, the more you've got to heat it to get it collected. Then, of course, I'm putting it very simply, but it gives you an idea of what is a refinery effectively. The fundamentals are as simple as what we had in school, but obviously it's a lot more complex and they've made it very smarter. Now, one of the things that are produced in the refining process is naphtha. Now, naphtha is a product that is again used as feedstock for a petrochemical refinery, right? So if, like, you have the refinery in India, which has got a petroleum refinery and a petrochemical refinery next to each other. So they produce a lot of naphtha that goes into a feedstock into the petrochemical refinery that produces chemicals, your benzenes and your ethanols and ethylenes and things like that. Okay. What are the other products that are produced that are, in terms of percentage in a refinery? The largest percentage of product that comes out of a refinery, average refinery, and the refineries are different and they have different feedstocks that define how much percentage. But as a thumb rule, 30 to 40% of the product that comes out from there is gasoline. Gasoline is nothing else but petrol in some parts of the world, right? So then you refine it to make it, whether you want 91 octane or 95 and 98 and so on and so forth. But 35 to 40% of your product that comes out of a refinery is gasoline. The reason I'm saying this is because this is where the impact of pricing starts coming in. The other product that comes out, which is also very high in percentage, somewhere around 30%, is diesel. All right, now, everybody knows where gasoline is used. It's used in cars, period. Everything goes into cars in some form or the other, whether anything that has got a 4-cylinder, 6-cylinder, 8-cylinder engine, whether it's a car or something else, you generally need gasoline over there. And the other thing that some motors need is diesel. Diesel is also known as gas oil, is known as D2, different parts of the world, so on and so forth. right? So, and then you have smaller percentage of, like people say, oh, the whole aircraft industry has come to a stop. That means we're not getting, there's a big glut going to be in the supply of jet oil, or there'll be an excess of it lying around and all. Only 8% of the refinery produces jet fuel. So it's not a huge component that is going to impact pricing when aircrafts, of course, 8% is still a lot. I'm not saying no, but when you compare that to gasoline and when you compare that to diesel, it's a very small percentage. It's a very small percentage, right? So then, of course, you have the smaller percentages of fuel oil. Then you have kerosene, so on and so forth. There are all smaller percentage. But if you put these three together, you've covered roughly 80% of your products that are coming out of a refinery, 75 to 80%. All right. Now, we've touched upon the cost of fracking. Sorry, guys. Okay, my apologies. I'm just, so we touched upon the cost of exploration with fracking. Now, in America, how much does it cost to explore crude oil out? The thumb rule that is floating around, and we'll never know the exact price or exact cost. If you get crude oil at below $40, it's not viable for exploration through fracking. So America starts going into a bit of a spin when the price of crude oil goes below $40. You have to remember, cost of fracking is not cheap. As we get smarter and as the technology improves, they can bring this cost down. But as of now, and I believe it's already coming down slightly, but as a thumb rule, somewhere between $38 to $40, anything less than that, fracking and the cost of production of crude oil in America becomes not viable. All right, so America is very careful. You may have heard that somewhere in April, the price of crude oil went negative. A lot of people react to that and say, oh, the whole market is crumbling and all. Now that went down for 24 hours. There were very different reasons as compared to supply and demand. It wasn't supply and demand. It was more the way the contracts were structured, that required people to pay the buyer money so that they could take the crude out and reduce their burden on their storages. All right, so there's a very different reason for it. Now we know that where the oils are coming out from. They're coming out from Middle East, effectively. They're coming out from West Africa. They're coming out from US Gulf Coast. All right. So where do these oils go now? You have to structure in the cost of shipping, right? People ignore the cost of shipping. Shipping can be expensive, can be cheap, totally on the tonnages that are available in the market. Middle East cargoes go all over the world. They go into China, they come into India, they go to Southeast Asia, they go to Europe, and they also go to America. You would think, why would you take oil from Middle East all the way to US Gulf Coast or West Coast of America? Aramco has got their own 100% owned refineries in America, completely owned by Aramco Saudi. So they prefer their own crudes as much as possible for obvious reasons. Oil from West Africa also goes to Europe and to America, predominantly the Americas, right? Very little West African crude comes all the way to China. US Gulf Coast, on the other hand, is penetrating the European market and the American market, North-South America. So if you see Southeast Asia and Middle East and Far East is all being fed cargo from the Middle East itself. It's not coming too much from any other place, purely because of the cost of shipping. Now, what does pricing depend on? It's on a few factors, right? You have supply and demand as the main component for it. That is the main component where supply and demand come in. What are the other factors that affect pricing? OPEC, being structured in such a way that if they decide to open their valves a little bit more, you'll find the supply going in excess of demand, putting the price down, right? There are other things where during northern winter, there is a lot more consumption of oil for heating. It may sound very primitive, but that's the hard reality of it at the moment. So during northern winter, you will find the demand going up. And if the supply is kept consistent, you'll find the price slightly inching upwards. This is historical over the years. Unless there is a factor like COVID or something comes about, or there is a war or something that happens that affects the balance. What are the other things that affected? We all saw what happened in COVID. So obviously when COVID came in, there were less cars on the road, the demand was less, the prices had to slip further and further. They went down. So they had no choice. If there is a war in the Middle East or anywhere in the world, not anywhere in the world, but in a place where oil comes out from, which is West Africa, Middle East, and America, or US Gulf Coast. If there is war in any of these locations and production is affected, the price of oil will go up. So these are the few things that affects oil pricing. We'll touch on it a little bit more as we go along. But anyone have any questions so far? Please.
What about Russia's role?
Yeah, good point. We'll come to Russia's role in the next, immediately after this. Okay, since you've asked it, let me tell you. Russia produces a lot of oil, a lot of oil. So where is Russia limited in exporting their oil? Russia has got, if you look at Russia's map, there are only 3 places on the Russian borders that are exposed to waterline. You have on the east coast of Russia, where you have Vladivostok, Novorossiysk, or not Novorossiysk, Vladivostok and one more port over there. So that's exposed to the Pacific. Then you have it in the Black Sea. In the Black Sea, you have Novorossiysk as one port. And then you have it in the Baltic, in St. Petersburg. All right. So you have 3 locations to get rid of oil. That is grossly insufficient for and to take that oil out. From Baltic and from the Black Sea, you cannot load a VLCC. A VLCC is a 2 million barrel ship, which is the largest ships that you get. They are very deep drafted, so those drafts are not protected while coming out of certain channels leading out from these 2 locations. So that leaves you only with the east coast of Russia, where the oil can come out from. So what does Russia do now? Russia knows China is the biggest consumer of crude oil, and they're neighbors, and their ideologies are not very different. So Russia constructs huge pipelines, which is presently in operation, whereby crude oil flows from Russia into China. And you and I will never know what are the quantities going through, but it is said to be in millions and millions of barrels per day, right? So it could go up to even 5-7 million barrels a day. The numbers 5 and 7 sound small, but when you put millions to it, it's a large quantity. It's a very large quantity. So that's how Russia is coming into picture. Now, Russia is a big economy by itself. Right? They do consume a lot, but nothing compared to what America consumes, but still they do a lot. So Russia is more predominant in exporting their products than their crude oil. Russia has got a lot of refineries too, by the way, a lot of them. And it's all controlled by the state. So very little information comes out with regard to things happening in Russia and China. And we all can understand why. So I don't know whether that answers your question to some extent at least.
Yeah, yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Now we'll come down to some other parts about pricing. Now, do we know how crude oil is priced globally and why? Does anyone have an idea about how it is done? No? Okay. What happened was initially long before America came into the picture. North Sea oil was the oil that was coming out and being benchmarked for a pricing purpose. That crude was called Brent crude. Those oil wells are finished. No more oil comes out from those wells, but the name has stuck to a point where people have formed Brent as an index against which all pricings happen. So you may have read on Bloomberg and you would have seen WTI price and Brent prices, right? So Brent is the pricing index for the oil that is sold globally, right? Now, depending on the grade, depending on the supply of that grade, depending on the demand of that particular grade, people sell it at a premium or a discount to the Brent, right? So things that come out of the Middle East, we would say, okay, it's good quality. No, I wouldn't say good quality, but a quality that has got a demand in that area. So they will attract, say, a premium going into Southeast Asia or China. Now, whom are they competing with? For example, for the same grade, if you want, that is coming out of Saudi, for instance, you're competing with, say, Nigerian crude, Angolan crude. They're all coming from West Africa and, of course, America. Now, before we go there, WTI, the other index. How did WTI come into the international market? Before, America was not exporting any crude. America was only importing crude. And WTI was an index for buying and selling crude locally within America. So if some producer is producing crude oil in America, then, and it is being sold to a refinery in America, it would be indexed against WTI. But when it started exporting, they decided that we do not want to follow Brent. We will follow our own index, which is WTI, and apply it into the export market. So if you notice at one stage, probably 3 years ago, the arbitrage between WTI and Brent was $10, $12. Today, it has narrowed down to $3. You would think like, oh, Americans are making a lot of money. No, they're not necessarily. Because if they have to penetrate a market in China, for instance, to take a VLCC from America to China, or taking it from Middle East to China, there is a difference of about $3 to $4 a barrel in shipping cost. And that is where America has kept their price to that point so they can compete with the crude oil that is coming out of Middle East, going into high consuming markets like India and China. Or if they even want to come to Europe, they have to compete with American crude. So these are the two indexes. Everything is either gone on a premium or on a discount to these two indexes. Where do we get these indexes from? You will have two publications out there, which is called Platts and Argus. So they every day publish the index for WTI and Brent on it. Don't follow Bloomberg. Bloomberg is for the layman on the streets. If you're doing trading, then you have to follow either of these as their index. There's also a thing called Brent ICE, but we won't go into the technicalities of it because then that's purely for a crude oil trader.
So, Anil, I'd like to ask at this stage that you said that Brent and WTI are indices, right? So is there a base formula by which they calculate the index? Is that something?
Okay,
we know?
good point. So how does one get what the index is when it comes to, say, Brent? So what companies like Platts and Argus do, and they are quite heavy into statistics. So every crude oil, for instance, instead of talking Brent all over the world, let's talk of the crude oil that comes out of Saudi, a particular grade of that Saudi crude. For example, Saudi crude is selling that particular grade at Brent minus 25 cents per barrel. All right. Platts records it. All right. records it. So the index that is prevalent at that time on that day is say $49.50. And they're selling it at a 25-cent discount. That means the price is going at $49.25 for that crude from that region. Right? So they do this for all over the world. Every crude oil that goes out. Now, this is not only for crude, by the way. Platts and Argus do this for every shipment of every product that goes out from any part of the world going anywhere. So they record all these and they average it out. It's quite a detailed work that they do. They charge you an arm and a leg to get their publication. A publication of crude oil from Platts can set you back by about $50,000 a year.
Okay.
So that's how they price it. And they give it a dollar figure. So yesterday it was $49.50 because everyone is selling it at 25 cents discount, for example. The index for the next day will become $49.25.
It's obviously a volume weighted average, right?
I'm not sure. I don't want to say something that I'm not 100% sure.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. But I would think logic would say that.
Yes. Yes. I mean,
Yeah.
most indices are.
Yeah, would be.
And this grading of oil that happens, it happens basis a standard formula, right? There would be a standard formula because the grading has to be a standard across geographies and refineries. Is that right?
When you say grading, what do you mean?
No, I'm assuming that when you say, when you're grading it, you are in a way standardizing the different types or whatever, right? Or what is the purpose of grading?
Okay, it's like this. Now, for example, you're taking out Saudi's crude oil, which is said to be reasonably sweet.
Okay.
Right? And you assume, I don't know what the API is coming out from there, but assume it's around 34. Right?
28,
China,
28.
out of Saudi? No, I think it's sweeter than that.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Okay, it's 28, supposing. And now supposing there's a big demand for that particular grade of crude going into China and into India. If Bahrain is selling a crude that is of a grade, doesn't have to be sweeter or sour, doesn't matter, but that does not tally with Saudi's grade, then they would have to compete with Saudi's grade by giving it, for example, a discount. So there is no such benchmark as this is the crude that is most popular. The sweeter the crude, the better it is.
Okay.
For refineries because of obvious reasons we spoke about gasoline and diesel coming out.
Right.
So
right.
generally the sweeter crudes attract a little bit of a premium as compared to the sour crudes, generally. So I don't know whether I've been able to explain it correctly, but you may have got the gist of it.
Yeah, yeah, I've got the gist of it. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. A lot of people ask this question. I think someone asked this question with Mahesh about what is the future of oil.
Yes, Kamlesh
going
Bhai
forward.
asked Kamlesh Bhai Zaveri, yeah.
Yeah. So in my opinion, I wish there are two things. I wish I could predict the price of oil tomorrow. I wouldn't be sitting and doing Zoom calls. I would be sitting on the beaches of Costa Rica, probably, you know. So it's almost impossible for anyone. A lot of people talk, economists say, in my opinion, if you go back and look at their words 1 year ago, you will find big variation in what they said and what happened, because it's something that you cannot predict. There are too many variables that can creep in all of a sudden that can change the whole dynamics. I think
Okay.
oil is here to stay for the next 50, 60 years. Well, there is no doubt about it. At least in our life and maybe the next generation, we will see the demand of oil being there. There's a growing middle class in populous countries like India and China. The number of cars on the streets are going to be up. There's going to be more trade that will require, the ships will require a lot more oils. So that demand will be there. There may be other renewables that will seep in, and that is for sure. They will seep in. What percentage of market will they take? They will occupy some percentage of market because a lot of countries in Europe are going green. So they are going with a lot more renewables. It is going to affect it. But to say that oil will not be required in 50, 60 years, I don't think so. That's going to be the case. I don't think so. I think in a very traditional fashion, I think it's going to stay. Yeah, Mahesh, you were saying something?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say, first of all, I hope AI will prove, you know, I hate to say it, but prove you wrong.
Different.
Because
Yeah.
Maybe that I'll try and convince you all why I think it could, because there are too many things happening out over there. And I
Possible.
think you answered Kamlesh Bhai's question in terms of expected rise in oil in the next 12 months. How much is oil supposed to rise in the next 12 months?
Look, I think demand is going to come back
Okay.
as we go along. Hopefully the vaccine has made just the announcement of the vaccine announced and there was a jump of $4 in the price.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
sentiments do play a big part also in this.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
some indication if there is an attack by US on or the Israelis on some part in the Middle East, suddenly you'll find the price of oil jump up again by a couple of dollars, maybe momentarily, but this happens. So I don't know. It's hard to say. Just to put another thing into perspective, sorry, America's cost of production, we said, is about $40. What do the Saudis need to be happy? I'm not saying the cost of production, but to keep the royal family happy, they have benchmarked that the price of oil should be above $80. So just to give you, and Saudi is quite a powerful, MBS, Putin, the president of America, these people are very powerful people. They are movers and shakers that can change the dynamics quite violently if they want to. Saudi Arabia has gone around and not only dependent on oil coming out from their country, they've invested in many other projects around the world. They've invested in refineries, they've invested in Reliance. Saudi Aramco now, I think, has got what, 20% stake in the refinery?
In the Reliance refinery?
Yeah.
I am not sure. They were talking about it a year back, but I don't think that, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think the deal has come through. They are still
really? I thought.
Okay.
Yes, Mahesh, you're right. The deal hasn't come through.
Okay.
Okay.
And just a quick question, Anil, sorry.
Yeah.
What is the role Iran is going to play in this?
Okay. Iran is the balancing factor. Now, we'll come to Iran and we'll come to Venezuela. If you see what America has done, I hope this doesn't go on YouTube outside. What America has done is, because they wanted to enter the market, they had to curtail some of these producers of crude oil.
Okay.
Now, Venezuela, being their neighbor, was the first one that got hit. They may give all the reasons, that may be right or wrong. It's a subjective matter. But what they did was put sanctions on Venezuela so that Venezuelan crude does not go out officially. And the same thing with Iran. But do you think that Iranian crude is not going out? Do you think that Venezuelan crude is not going out? Of course it is. Of course it is.
Okay.
Every bit of it is going out, you know.
Yeah, I see a smile on Yasin's face. So. Yasin?
He's next door.
Anil, can I add something here? And I have a question for you.
Sure.
You said that oil is here to stay. How do you see electric cars and the demand for oil and refined products? Keeping in view, majority of the developed countries are saying that by 2030, you will have only electric cars on the road. So that directly affects the refined products like gasoline and diesel. So this is one question. Secondly, how do you see the American statement of energy independence? Now, that definitely depends upon the cost of production. But the ultimate objective of America is to have energy independence. That means lesser dependence on the Middle Eastern oil. So these are two questions. And how do you, third one, I give you all the questions at one time and you can give us a reply whenever you feel like during this conversation. The other thing is geopolitics in the Middle East, which talks about Libya, about Iran, about, of course, Venezuela also. And the quality of the oil in both Libya and Iran is, what I understand, is sweeter.
Yep.
And much better quality than the other countries which are producing oil. That is number three. How do you relate this out here? Because looking at the American elections and with most probably Iran coming back into the GCPOA, the production of oil will increase. And that will pump in more volumes into the oil market. And that also will happen with Libya also. And the other factor, Anil, which I feel as very important is that China is going to invest $400 billion in the Middle East. That is primarily to modernize the exploring facilities of Iran. And that investment is going to come in only on Iran. These are my 3-4 questions. You can answer it whenever you feel like. Thank you.
Okay. I think your point about the America being totally independent, energy independent, is probably already happened now. They don't need any crude oil to be imported as of now because their production and their consumption is pretty close to similar. And they've got enough refineries to cater for the demand locally. So I think they've achieved that by doing the exploration through the fracking system of their shale crude. Secondly, China's investment in Iran, I am not 100% sure, and I don't think so I'm in a position to make a comment on that because I have little understanding and knowledge of what's happened behind the scenes over there. So I can't comment on that. Talking about electric cars, no doubt, a lot of car manufacturers are moving towards electric. They will take a share of the market. There's no doubt. How much will it impact and how soon will it impact? Whilst they're saying a lot, you've got to understand that these oil companies are not very weak. They will restrict cars like Tesla and all. They may keep these hybrids and some electric cars in the market, but Tesla has been around for close to 100 years now. Mr. Tesla started this whole thing in, if I'm not mistaken, 1908. So he has not been allowed to enter the market. Now he has made inroads through Elon Musk being quite adventurous. And I think there will be electric cars, but there will be an impact on it. How much of it will it impact? Hard to say. Hard to say whether it will destroy the oil market. In my opinion, no, it won't. Because diesel is used in many other places besides in cars. All heavy equipment needs diesel. So, and your
Anil,
other question about the
right.
grades. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
So the other question about the grades, Yes, Libyan crude is very sweet. Iranian crude is also very sweet. Libya is, after Gaddafi was thrown over, it's now being managed by the Europeans completely. BP and Total are in there virtually running everything about Libya. Libya is in civil unrest. So the crude oil is being totally taken away. And I think most of it is anyway going to Europe. Iran is always a difficult one. How much of oil has been going out in these years that they have had the sanctions? I don't think so. They're going to keep quiet and not let any oil go out. I've heard stories that it is crossing the border and going via pipelines to China. I don't know how far it is true or not true. Similarly, when Iraq had their issues with them, the Kurds were exporting their crude via Turkey through the Mediterranean and also through Izmir, if I'm not mistaken. So these countries come up with things that are not easy to monitor and not easy to track. May not be in full force, but their economy depends on it. So they would be doing something along those lines. Venezuela is in doldrums because they're too close to the Yanks, so they won't be able to do too much. But I think it's a matter of time before the lid on Venezuela is also going to be lifted. Look, these are all things that you have a point. We don't know where it's going to be heading.
Okay, Anil, we are almost at the hour of our start. So you have any other points you want to cover quickly? Are there any questions which people want to ask?
Yeah, I think if anybody wants to ask any question, I've pretty much covered the fair share.
Yeah, Neil, it's Ian here.
How are you going, Captain?
I'm going well, sir. I'm going well. You said early in the piece that, as it stands, America's the biggest consumer of crude oil. I'm thinking mainly in terms of China. Over the next few decades, do you see that changing much? Or is America still going to be the biggest consumer into the foreseeable future?
Presently, the difference is quite large. There's a difference of approximately 7 million barrels a day between China's consumption and America's consumption. So to reach that point, I think in a couple of decades, I don't think so, because America is very powerful. A lot of people may not be able to comprehend the power that America has on the global world and the oil pricing and everything. They do it very subtly. Just to put it in perspective, crude oil is sold in dollars, right? If somebody wants to have a gain on their exports, and if they devalue their currency, they gain on their exports. You see? So you drop your price, your currency slightly, if you can, and in whatever way it's done. I'm not an economist. The moment the currency drops and their exports remain the same, they've had a gain. They don't have to increase the price. Of course, it affects their imports because their cost of buying becomes expensive. I can understand that by GDP. But so, yeah, I don't think so China will overtake America so quickly. I think it will take a few years. Anybody else have anything, or we can ask Mahesh to take over? No?
Praveen had something to say. Praveen?
Yes. So one doubt: whom does Pertamina and Petronas, basically Malaysia and Indonesia, whom does they do they export, and who caters to the small countries like Vietnam, Thailand, etc.?
Indonesia is a net importer of crude oil, so they import; they don't export. Malaysia does export, but in very small quantities. They're not a big exporter. Very small.
All right, sir. I mean, not crude oil. How about refined products?
Yeah. Refined products is a very different dynamics. If they find they're going to get more for their money by exporting it to, say, some of these countries which are willing to pay a higher price for it, they would export it. But in terms, and you got to go commodity by commodity. We can't put a general terms in terms of all the petroleum products. So you'll have to break it down, say whether it's gasoline or diesel or gas oil or fuel oil, different things. So it's hard to say for the whole gambit.
All right. And countries like Thailand, Vietnam, Myanmar, where do they get their refined products from?
Thailand has their own refineries. Myanmar imports everything. Vietnam is a big importer of petroleum products. Yeah, so these small countries, Cambodia, Laos, they're all generally net importers of petroleum products. They're not able to satisfy their demand locally. You got to realize a lot of the refineries were made many years ago in many parts of the world. For example, Mexico has about 6 or 8 refineries, I'm not sure. They were all made many years ago. The crude that they were producing at that time was very sweet crude. So they could refine that, the refinery was made accordingly. Now the crude that they are producing, they've finished with all their sweet crude. They're left with the heavy stuff. Most of the stuff is heavy. So that refinery is not equipped to refine heavy products effectively. So they're working at 30 and 40% capacity. So even though the refineries are working, they can't produce the quantity of gasoline or diesel that they would need to have it in their shores. So they import the bulk of it from America, even though they've got 6 to 8 refineries. They're working at very short capacity. Like this, there are many old refineries around the world that cannot cater to some of the heavy crudes that they could get at a bargain, for instance. India has upgraded a lot of their refineries recently. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money being spent, but they have upgraded. So they are moving with times because they've got the money. A lot of other countries don't have the money to upgrade their refineries, and they depend on imports for their basic needs. India, by the way, in the energy market, only imports crude oil, LNG, LPG, and bitumen. They have enough refineries now for the first time where they do not necessarily need to import petroleum products. And this has come about in the last 4 or 5 years, which is a big thing for India. Their dependence, I mean, they'll never be able to live without crude oil. They'll need to import because they don't have much of crude oil. ONGC produces very small amounts, so they will have to import. And if they tie hands with some people in the Middle East who have got interest in supplying in one form or the other, without taking names, yeah, they will do very well.
Anil, one more question for you is,
Sure.
How do you see Nigeria and the refinery that is being built out there?
See, Nigeria has got what they call the champagne crude of the world. And everyone talks of Bonny Light. That's the champagne crude, they say, of the world. It's the prime product. So as far as crude oil is concerned, they have got enough of it to cater for their small country. It's not a very large country in terms of population, and it's quite a big landmass. Presently, they're importing a large chunk of their petroleum products from outside. If you can keep a cap on the corruption over there, they could become totally energy independent. But history says otherwise, you know. It's always a big problem in Nigeria about corruption. So with that refinery coming up,
do you have the details of their production and the capacity that they have got?
Production of what? Sorry?
Of crude?
Yes, I can tell you. It keeps on fluctuating, but presently they're doing 70 million barrels per month of exports, roughly. And it fluctuates between 60 and 90.
Thank you.
Yeah. 90 is when everything is hunky-dory and flowing through, but in the bad times, it's about 60. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Any other thoughts? Any other suggestions?
I just have one comment on that Nigerian. Most people associate Bonny Light with Nigeria. There's 8 other grades there. Bonny Light is just a small segment.
That's true.
Anil, perhaps maybe.
That's true. That's very true. There are 8 grades and they can blend some grades to make very different grades too. That is presently happening. But you're right, everybody associates Nigeria with Bonny Light. But anyone who tells you they've got Bonny Light to sell to you, my suggestion would be walk away, because champagne crudes of the world are not available in bars around the corner. So this is taken away by the top oil companies first.
Okay. Shall we?
All right.
Any other questions? Otherwise, we'll start on the next segment. This will be much shorter, and my apologies that I had not intimated the audience in advance. But as I mentioned earlier, Anil requested me to speak on AI, artificial intelligence, for the oil dynamics vertical. And just last night, I didn't commit to him earlier, but just last night I got the time, so I wrapped up. I put together a quick presentation. I don't think it should take more than 20 minutes, hopefully, overall. So just let me. And before that, since I had mentioned the word geopolitics in the topic, so I just wanted to quickly cover a couple of minutes on that. So I'll just share my screen and. Okay, so I just wanted to quickly cover the geopolitics on the Indian impact. This has been trending in the news over here. We are at all-time highs in the oil prices. I'm sure all of us have heard of Vinod Khosla. He's an Indian-based venture capitalist, and this is referring to a point which Anil made earlier. Vinod Khosla is also an ethanol evangelist. He's been championing the cause of reducing energy dependence for the US from the Middle East since almost the last 10 to 15 years. So The Economist of 23rd March 2006 reported a very interesting conversation between him and a top Saudi guy. And essentially, this was at the Davos meet in 2006, where after Vinod Khosla had completed his presentation, a Saudi official came to him and told him that it costs us less than $1. Okay, this was in 2006. So if we are today sitting in 2020, even assuming the price has gone up by, let's say, 10 times, 20 times, we are only talking about $20, which is a cost, to which for me is a very important revelation as a consumer, because India imports 80% of our oil. So this was one point I just thought I'll add to what we mentioned. And the other part is, as all of us are aware, India is caught in a literal, you can call it as a battle or a fight with China. I always like to keep reminding my Indian friends, my American friends, that India has a 3,500 kilometer with China. It's very good for the Americans to sit and say that, or any other Western countries, that we should fight China, but it's the only country which really has a 3,500 kilometer with China is India. And we also have Pakistan on the other side, which is for all practical purposes today a state of China. So how does this impact, or what impact does it have on the oil geopolitics? This was told to me by one of my friends in the defense long time back. I'm sure all of us over here are aware of it. But these are the oil routes by which currently the Indian Ocean plays a very important role as far as imports of oil by Asia is concerned. As you can see, all the oil routes are passing through the Indian Ocean. And in fact, in today's newspaper, General Bipin Rawat, who is the chief of Indian Defense Staff, has made the same point that the world's attention is today on the Indo-Pacific region. Many of us know that America has a presence in Diogo Garcia. I have circled it in the graphic over here. And Diogo Garcia has a very strategic location because from where Diogo Garcia is situated, most of the Middle East, most of the Indian subcontinent is, essentially at a very striking distance, both for their, air power as well as a base for the Navy. So it is an emerging, attention of the world is emerging on essentially and China always has this fear that India and America will get together and block their routes. This is something which Anil mentioned in the last time we met. He said there is a Russia-China pipeline which is being set up, which as per this trade magazine oilprice.com, which I'm sure most of us over here are familiar with, they said this is a super energy project to watch. So this is essentially China's way of reducing its dependence on the oil routes in the Indian Ocean. So I don't know what is the status of this project. Maybe Anil could comment better. And in case any of you is interested in more details on the role China is playing, there is a great presentation by this guy called Karan Datta. It's called Roaring Tiger, Menacing Dragon. It's more than 2 hours long. I'll be sharing the link in this slide, so you could look at it from that point of view. In case you're more interested in the impact of geopolitics on the Indian markets. Okay, this was one. Any comments on this, Anil? Any thoughts? Okay.
No, it seems okay.
Sorry. Okay. This is the next part which Anil requested me, which was on AI, artificial intelligence and oil dynamics. I'll try and keep it as non-technical as possible. So I'll quickly go through it. But as earlier, you can stop me anytime. So this was what Anil's request to me, that whether we could use artificial intelligence, to look at the differences which are happening in the oil consumption due to seasonal changes, the currency fluctuations, and the reaction to strategic events or global events, like let's say the assassination of the Iranian nuclear head, or a hurricane hits let's say a US coast. What happens to the oil prices? So all these things play a huge role in the pricing of oil. But can artificial intelligence be used? So I am not an oil domain expert, but my understanding from artificial intelligence is that the technology is sufficiently technology. It's independent of any domain or vertical or function. So you could have the technology which could help in the future, because it's getting more and more powerful as we speak. So this was Anil's request to me. So I thought, let me quickly cover the basics of AI so that, to whatever extent I can cover it in 15-20 minutes. So AI is nothing but augmented intelligence. It is just a tool to help us augment our intelligence. That's it. It's nothing more than a tool. It's not that alien which is going to come and take away our jobs or going to come and kill us. It's a technology which is controlled by humans. But yes, there is a danger, as a lot of people have said, that if the wrong people get hold of AI, for instance, if the North Korean leader gets hold of AI, or you have bad agents like one of the largest countries in the world today, they have an entire army of AI hackers whose only job is to use AI to disrupt other countries. So what does AI do? AI essentially does easier, cheaper, and faster predictions. That's it. That's what AI does. So so we have examples here. We have Google Maps, we have Netflix, we have Zomato. Maybe people cannot see it because it's on the right-hand side of the screen. We have Facebook. Facebook is one of the largest users of AI, and their AI infrastructure has to be understood to really believe what it is capable of doing. And then we also have Apple, which is not shown over here, and we have LinkedIn. So these are two companies. So today, every company, earlier, about 2 decades back, it was said that every technology company was an internet company. Today and going ahead, I can say every technology company is going to be an AI company. As mentioned, it is just a tool. So if there is one technical term that you need to understand from my presentation, it is these two words, neural network. A neural network is essentially an architecture in which AI works. As we will see in the subsequent slides, it is independent of any domain. So I could have the same neural network, help me classify photographs, help me predict oil prices. And it is loosely patterned on the workings of our brain. So, a lot of research has gone into it. So a neural network is the foundation of what is called as machine learning and deep learning in AI. And it really is the workhorse. So whatever technology developments that you have seen in the last 5 years, whether it is Google's self-driving autonomous cars, or whether it is or autonomous fighter planes, or whether it is takeoff and landing by planes, it is all done through neural networks. What are neural networks? Essentially, the inputs come in from the left-hand side, and then you have predictions on the right-hand side. And in mathematical terms, what the computer does is it only generates a probability of something that you want to predict. Okay, so far, can I go ahead? Any questions at this stage?
No questions.
Okay, I'll go ahead. So I've given some examples of where neural networks are used. On the left-hand side, you see Butter. Butter is a family dog. He, by the way, is very popular on Instagram. I believe he's got many thousands of followers. So I can train a neural network to put in Butter's image. And what the neural network can first tell me whether he is a dog or a cat, which we call in technical terms as image classification. And further on, if it's a dog, it can also be trained to tell me whether it is butter or not butter. So all of us have used it. For example, whenever we upload photographs on Facebook, Facebook's AI algorithms in the background know that, they give you suggestions on the names of the people whom it recognizes. So this is one example of how AI uses, that is, of course, the term for that is called face recognition. The broader term is image classification. Okay, and I have just shown you over here 3 hidden layers. The networks today have billions, billion as in billions of parameters. Just to give an example, Elon Musk had a company called OpenAI, which has a year back released an AI tool called as GPT-3. If you want, you can Google on it. It's really a mind-boggling AI. It has got 175 billion parameters. The energy consumption which it takes just to make predictions is huge. But because computing costs have become so cheap, because of social networks, data is available freely. So today you have these large companies like Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, Google, Baidu, Netflix, who all have literally set up super infrastructures of AI at their backends, to be able to do these things for us in seconds, literally seconds. So this is one example of an AI, image classification. This is another example where the area is called as NLP, natural language processing. So I have given examples of 2 tasks over here. One is whether a sentence is valid or not. So when we are typing something, for instance, and the computer tells you that this is a valid word, it gives you suggestions on words. So this is one task. And the second task is analyze sentence sentiment. Movie reviews, a lot of Yelp, people have heard of Yelp. So these are all recommendation systems which help you. So they have algorithms to analyze the paragraph or the sentence that you have put up. So I'll quickly show you 2 examples of this. So this is what goes inside the network is a sentence. The cat sat on the mat. This is a valid sentence. So the network only gives you one, whether it is a valid sentence. And if you put in an invalid word, for instance, instead of the word on, if I put song, it's an invalid sentence. So computers have been trained to do this all the time. So this is an example of that. So again, an example of a sentiment analysis. The cat sat on the mat has a positive sentiment score. The cat ate the rat. From the rat's point of view, it has got a negative sentiment score. So again, sentiment analysis is something which computers can do very quickly based on analysis of data. 3 years back, my wife was fed up with me spending lots of times on WhatsApp, and I wanted to prove to her that, I was actually not wasting my time on WhatsApp. So what I did was, I have about 55 WhatsApp groups. I have just shown 6 of them over here, which are specific topic groups. I have a WhatsApp group on web security. There's a WhatsApp group on Aadhaar, which is India's digital identity. I have a WhatsApp group on global economy and macros. I have a WhatsApp group on stocks and shares. And the last, I have Indo-China, Pakistan geopolitics. So what I did was, I wrote a software based on Google. I dumped all this onto Google's AI software. And Google automatically gave me the text categories that it found. So for instance, as you can see over here, the last column talks about the confidence percentage figure. Google's AI tells me that for internet and web security, it is 96% sure that I'm talking of something called as, computer security. Or in the last, if you go into the last topic, India, China, Pakistan geopolitics, if you it is 84% sure that it is news, but yet it is 56% sure that it is a sensitive subject. So and these are all. This is not something, by the way, which costs thousands of dollars. It literally takes a few pennies to get results from Google's infrastructure. So remember what I talked about when I said earlier in one of my opening slides about faster, cheaper, and easier predictions. This is one example of that. Another example, Yasin and Anil are my schoolmates. So this is our school, St. Teresa's High School, Bandra, one of the best schools in the country. We have a painter in our group, a gentleman called Ashok Nawani. He keeps releasing his paintings, on a school group. So I wrote a software. I didn't write it actually. I used one of Google's AI services to take the content from the first image, which is the school background, to take the style of Ashok Nawani's painting. And on the right hand side, I don't know whether it's visible to you, but it is the school, it is a painting generated by the AI based on the style of his painting, but the photograph has been taken from the first. So this in technical terms is called a neural transfer architecture. And you see below are the 2 icons I have shown. These are again neural networks which are doing all the heavy lifting. My kids at my home told me that, Papa, all this we can do easily via Instagram. Why are you wasting your time? I believe Instagram filters allow you to do all this automatically. So a second example, this is Ashok's photograph. So on his birthday gift, I took his photograph, I put the painting, and I sent him a photograph with his painting superimposed on his photograph. Again, the point I'm trying to make is that this is something which is available open source. It's available free of cost. So what this will do is this will revolutionize the entire, there are entire economies, there are entire industrial superstructures which are getting demolished because of AI. So this is again just one tool which is available on the web if one wants to try it out. The third domain, which is more from a business point of view, there is a bank in Portugal. They released their customer database of about 35,000 customer records, various attributes of the customer, whether the customer is qualified, whether the customer is, how long is he with the bank. And on the screen below, you can see some of the attributes which were, which talks about the customer's job, marital status, and the AI has to predict whether a customer will subscribe to a deposit or not. So on the right hand side, you can see the 3 dates. There is November 20th, 21st, and 23rd. This is a project which I'm currently learning a formal AI course with Microsoft. So just at my level of skills, which are not very high in terms of AI, I was able to generate more than 91% accuracy on this data set. I have never run a bank before. And the computer was able to literally run thousands and thousands of models, in a span of 4 hours, and gave me a prediction of 91% on the accuracy of the data. What does it mean? Today, for instance, banks spend billions and billions of dollars on marketing. So it's extremely important that today AI is available as a tool to help you make predictions which are far more reliable and better than what humans can do. Coming back to the topic that we have, AI usage in oil energy domains. Again, this is what Anil's request was. I just put it back over here for a contextual reference. So we have 100 million barrels of oil, natural gas daily, correct, which is being consumed in the world. The market size in 2019 was $3.3 trillion. This is the volatility, what Anil mentioned about, the price of oil becoming negative in the exact date was 20th April 2020, where it went down to minus $40. The reason I'm showing the graph over here, because if you see the three data metrics, one is the size of the market in terms of volume terms, other is the size of the market in value terms, and the last is the volatility. So wherever you have, these three, you have a large market, you have a market where, the consumption is happening regularly, and you have a market with high volatility. Technology can always play a role. So I just picked up, and this is just a simple Google search. I've just picked up the first 3 references I found in this area, from the Google search. Again, I'm saying it because I am not an oil domain expert. The point is that this was one research which was done, where they have done oil price prediction with artificial neural networks. Interesting point. Can we use machine learning to forecast oil prices during the 2020 collapse? Just Anil also mentioned about this, but machine learning, again, I'm just saying, don't get worried about the term. It is just a subfield of artificial intelligence. So what happened actually in 2020? All of us are familiar. Anil spoke of it. I don't know. I'm not sure whether you are able to see this visual, but it shows the New York Motor Collision Database. If you see the data, I'll share the slides with you. The data literally during COVID-19, because there were less cars on the road, the accidents came down. This was again a slide which I shared. It's a very busy slide, so just focus on the left-hand side. If you see COVID-19, we had a drastic change in behavior of users. These are actual cases from this data refers to the Chinese data, where if you see the numbers on the left-hand side, 200 million workers trying distributed work from home, 120 million students doing online education, 10x number of users who have registered for remote diagnostic services. So what actually happened is that because the COVID came suddenly, it disturbed a lot of data models on which AI was based. So I will share a dirty secret with you. AI failed miserably as far as its understanding its impact on which happened because of COVID-19. Because at the end of the day, AI is just a model. It's a mathematical model based on the data which is fed to it, and it was not able to cope up with such sudden changes in the data pattern. So one of the things as AI researchers we do is we have a concept of AI resilience. We have to build in AI models which are which are much more resilient. I have shared the visual of 3 little pigs. 3 little pigs is we all knew from childhood. There was a pig who made his house with bricks. So the point I'm trying to get across in this slide was AI models will become more resilient in terms of their impact of to data changes. We have two concepts. One is called data drift and concept drift, which talks of changes in data which happen in the AI models. Forecasting energy consumption, again, this is an area. An interesting fact I'll share with you is Google in its data centers with servers is so efficient that when I'm typing a Google query in my phone or my PC, the energy consumption in my phone and PC is more than the energy consumption which Google expends to send you the results back. So just imagine the implication of what I'm saying. I enter a word in Google search. I say oil prices. And let's say if I've taken 10 seconds to type in that phrase, Google's data center at the back end, I don't know, wherever it is, in Ireland or Mumbai, it has essentially used less energy than my PC or my phone in answering that query. Because these people are literally working with real-time models which have hundreds and thousands of parameters at the back end. There was a movie which came out called The Social Network. It's a movie which came on Netflix. I have not seen it, but essentially every click that you type on your computer or a phone gets recorded. And that's how AI becomes so smart. It learns every move that you are making, every website you visit, every action that you do. I get a email from my sons, I respond immediately. It knows that my sons are very important to me and I'm responding to their things like these. Every data event is recorded by their computers. If there's one article I need you to look at, is this. This is an article by Andrew Ng. Andrew Ng was earlier with Google Brain, and this is an article that he wrote 3 years back. He then ran the data infrastructure for Baidu, which, as all of you are familiar, is China's #1 AI company, and currently he runs his own company in the US. He's one of the most profound and the most knowledgeable AI researchers. This prediction was made 3 years back, and what is the prediction? The prediction is that any mental task which takes less than 1 second of thought, so we can probably automate it either now or in the future. And mind you, this was 3 years back. So we are talking about a task which 1 second of thought. What is a task which 1 second of thought? My wife walks into the room and my brain tells me that's your wife, right? It's a face recognition. So, that's a task which has taken my brain less than 1 second. It will get automated. All the senses, 5 senses that we have, seeing, touching, smell, there is work underway to try and automate this as much as possible. This is my last slide. For those of you who are non-Hindi understanding, this is on the left-hand side is Dilip Kumar. He is, India's topmost actor. It was his birthday yesterday. And this was a joke which was circulating during COVID, that there were so many webinars happening. He's telling his lady love called Anarkali, please get up, the webinar is over. Okay, thank you. Discussions and questions. I'll stop my slide presentation.
One question, Mahesh.
Yes.
How important is 5G when it comes to AI?
See, Anil, what is happening is it is obviously important because you will, the faster networks that you have, the better you can predict faster. But just to give you a simple example, the Zoom session we are having right now. Okay, there's a company called NVIDIA. Okay, NVIDIA is the company which makes these chips which run in the data centers of Microsoft, Google. They have just come out with a new technology by which, not using the network, what they will do is, when the technology is released, all of us, when we download Zoom, as a part of Zoom, there will be an AI layer built into Zoom, which will automatically see the screen positions of all the people whose videos are active right now. Okay, right now, I can see 5 people whose videos are active. Okay. So it will see where Anil is sitting, it will see where Yasin is sitting. And what it will do is, Yasin will be able to see me as speaking directly to him. There will be eye contact. between my real-time video and Yasin. It will happen similarly with you also. So to answer your question, yes, 5G is important, but at the end of the day, you know, there are smarter AI algorithms which are happening, which what they will do is they're happening at two levels. One is AI today needs a lot of data. Like I told you about this GPT-3, which has got 175 billion parameters. You know, I don't know whether you are aware. I'll give you one more example. When we go on the Amazon website, you know, Jeff Bezos has written thousands of virtual AI agents. The minute I log on into the Amazon website, you know, those agents are like servants which go into the various parts of the Amazon and AI infrastructure, and they bring all the data which is required to satisfy me as a user. So it will tell me last time you bought this, last time, you know, you were not very happy with it. The point I'm trying to tell you is advances are happening in two levels. One is the algorithms which are working in the backend. When I say backend, means the large cloud infrastructures which literally have millions and millions of computers which are there. Secondly, we forget our phones are getting smarter and smarter and more powerful. So what I expect happen will our phones will have a layer of AI which is built into the hardware. See, hardware is much faster than software, you know. So 5G is important, yes, but it is not a road stopper, you know. You know, for instance, you know, in 1994, I was representing a consortium of Indian software companies at CeBIT, you know, CeBIT, Germany, Hanover 94. So there was a Russian stall next to me, and that guy came and told me, he says, you know, you Indians are already so good. Why do you want to create competition for us? Then I went into his background. He was a Russian scientist. Please remember, Russia had some of the most intelligent guys who were working on some of their older technologies, you know, but because what happened was, because they were constrained by, you know, technology imports and all, they were able to do a lot less with a lot more. So I see the same thing happening, you know, in terms of this. And today, if it is 5G, see, in technology, we have something called as Moore's law. Moore's law, which says that every few years, the number of transistors, physical electronic transistor chips, which you can put on a square centimeter or a square millimeter of a hardware will doubles. Interestingly, what has happened in the last 3-4 years, Moore's law has stopped working. But there are new laws which have come up which say that whatever is happened because of Moore's law deficiencies is getting compensated now because of AI. So to make a long question short, yes, it will help, but it is not a showstopper. This one point I wanted to emphasize to you. You know, about 2.5 years back, I got a chance to speak at the Amazon headquarters in New York. This was a community which was the machine learning researchers community in New York, and the guy who organized it was the Amazon guy. So there is a technique in AI called as entity embeddings, which I'm working on, which essentially is vertical independent, technology independent, domain independent, and function independent. So let me say that again, because when I speak to many seasoned industry professionals, they have a hard time believing it. For example, I'll put it another way. My son is today a medical doctor in New York. Last 3 years, I've been telling him to learn mathematics. You know, today, why is it important for a doctor to learn mathematics? Because the diagnosis part of your symptoms is and will be done by AI much better and much faster than a human can do. Because see, the neural network infrastructure which I spoke to, I don't know whether you all saw my screen, but I have literally used the same icon. I'll just show it to you once. If you see this, so the neural networks that I've shown you, the fundamental structure is the same. It doesn't depend. It can do image recognition. It can do voice recognition. It can do, it can do language translation. It can do sentiment analysis. It can do forecasting. You name it. The sky is literally the limit. So the point I'm trying to say is that because AI is such a horizontal technology, it's very easy to scale up. That example I gave you about that Portugal bank marketing, it's running on, I ran those experiments on Microsoft's Azure data center. It cost me about, it cost me probably a few dollars to run it. It ran for 4 hours. And it actually experimented, those final figures of accuracy, I don't know whether you could see it, 91.74%. It actually ran through permutations and combinations of thousands and thousands of models, which is impossible for a human being to do. So when we talk about a model, since we are talking about the domain of oil, where we are having a market cap, market size of $3.3 billion, 100 million barrels a day, extreme volatility to events. To me, it's a natural fit for AI. I'm sure, 100% sure someone sitting in the US CIA or the Chinese, or Saudi, they are planning, they already have models which are, which they are using to do this. So, okay. Any other questions? Any other thoughts? Any suggestions?
I think we've had a good session.
Okay, just a request I had from all of you, 2 things. I'll be submitting, first, if you can kindly share your LinkedIn or Facebook profiles to either me or Anil, which I will circulate it to everybody. So all those who have invested an hour and a half today, we actually almost 2 hours can benefit. And other is, if you have any topics that you would like us to cover, we already have a couple of topics. One is Bitcoin. We are going to be talking about Bitcoin in the near future. We are also going to be talking about blockchain. Blockchains are the building block of Bitcoin. People have requested me to speak on cybersecurity, which is again an area which is of importance. So depending on how we go ahead. So kindly give in your suggestions and your. I will also be circulating a feedback form for the meet. My request to you is please fill it and please return it back. And thank you for your time. Any last questions? Any closing talks? Thank you to Anil. I really thank you for your time and your efforts in putting this together.
Yeah, thanks,
thank
Mahesh,
you to
for
all the
organizing it.
participants who joined. Yeah.
Thank you, Anil, and thank you, Mahesh.
Yeah.
It's good to meet all of you virtually.
Yes.
And I'm definitely going to meet Barry in Vancouver. Take care.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, Yasin.
Thank you, everybody. It was good to be part of it. Thanks a lot.
Nice to join you. Good luck.
Thanks, Pradeep.
Thank you.
Thanks, Captain.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Anil. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Mr. Mahesh, you would be sharing those links in your presentation, which you had mentioned.
Yes, I'll be sharing. See, the oil part, oil dynamics part, the geopolitics, I'll be sharing. Once Anil gives me the points, I'll be sharing that. And on the AI part, I will just discuss it in my company, and then I'll be sharing some of the slides with appropriate modifications on the AI presentation. Okay.
Sure.
So I'll do it in the next few days. So. And just send me your LinkedIn or Facebook profiles. I'll really, because I would like that, we try and build a community of people where we interchange and exchange thoughts and words. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mahesh.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys.
Bye. Bye.